Good afternoon, my name is Ellen Domp, and I, along with Mr. Spielvogel, represent Christopher Thomas. At the beginning of jury selection, you were asked if you understood and accepted that the defendant, Mr. Thomas, is presumed innocent. You were asked if you understood and accepted that the government had to prove Mr. Thomas guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You all said yes. Those questions, those words, they were not empty words. They were heavily loaded and carry and support the entire criminal justice system. Disregard them, and our system crumbles, and you are left with a society with the justice system that offers little recourse against the power of the government. Mr. Thomas, now 24 years old, is charged with very serious crimes, colossal crimes that allegedly occurred in August 2020 when he was 21 years old. You must consider Christopher Thomas separately apart from anyone else. Anyone else in this courtroom when you are listening to the evidence. The fact that 5 other men sit here alongside him does not change that. The government must prove Christopher Thomas guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the charged offenses, and I submit to you that they cannot. As you heard, the essence of the charges against my client are that he allegedly committed an act of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and assault with a dangerous weapon for the purpose of maintaining and increasing position in an enterprise engaged in racketeering. We submit that the evidence will show that Christopher Thomas is not guilty of these charges, but it is important nonetheless for you to understand what the charges mean exactly. Simply for now, and you will receive instructions from the judge at the end of the case, but for now, what it means is that an act of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and assault with a dangerous weapon if committed, had to be done for the purpose of maintaining and increasing position in an enterprise engaged in racketeering. And the government must prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. So if the evidence shows there was no enterprise, or that the offenses committed were for another reason, the government has failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. This case, it's not an easy concept to grasp, but nonetheless, it's this case before you. But as I said earlier regarding Mr. Thomas, you must consider him individually, and this will be of no concern to yours because the evidence will show that he did not commit any acts described in the indictment. We understand that this case is an emotional case. It involves allegations of murder, and it doesn't get more serious than that. The allegations in this case can evoke normal emotion, sorrow for the victims, for our communities, for our society. But emotions cannot decide this case. They must not decide this case. They must be put aside. See, this case must be decided like every case, every criminal case that enters this courtroom, this courthouse. It must be decided only on the facts presented to you, only on those. And those facts, as you've heard so many times, must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Any collective emotions that you feel about these shootings or this murder, any outrage, has no place here, has no place in deciding this case against Mr. Thomas. You are here only for this case and only to determine if the government has proved these allegations against Mr. Thomas. And as the case unfolds, you will see that the government has failed to do so. Mr. Thomas, and this has been said a lot, and I've said it a lot, but he is presumed innocent. And that presumption of innocence starts from the moment the case begins, the moment throughout the entire trial, when you go back into deliberations until the very moment a verdict is rendered. And we submit that your verdict regarding Mr. Thomas will be not guilty. So what will the evidence show regarding Christopher Thomas? Well, it will show that there's no eyewitness. The government has no eyewitness who will say that they saw Mr. Thomas on Oak Street or saw Mr. Thomas commit the charged offenses. There will be no evidence that Mr. Thomas told anyone he committed these crimes, or for that matter, talked about this case. There will be no evidence that he used social media to talk about this case. There will be no evidence that his phone was tracked near the crime scene at the time of the crime, and there will be no physical evidence linking him to this crime. The government talked about a surveillance video in Parkway Gardens, and they talked about identifications off of a surveillance video. It is for you, and only you, to decide what that video shows and who that video has in it. But we submit to you, you will not see Christopher Thomas in the surveillance video, and importantly, the video is not of the quality that any reliable identification of Christopher Thomas could be made, and certainly not an identification of him that would withstand the government's burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is the only standard from which to evaluate this case. So what about the witnesses? Not a witness, none, will say they were at the scene and saw Christopher Thomas. None will say they personally were anywhere on August 4th and personally saw Christopher Thomas. But the government will present some witnesses that will talk to you about Parkway Gardens, about O Block, and talk about various activities in the neighborhood. They will not, however, talk about Mr. Thomas in relation to the conduct alleged on August 4th, 2020. The government will present these few witnesses as reliable and credible and truthful witnesses. And you will know who they are. They're working for the government. They're cooperating with the government. And some are receiving money in return and others are receiving benefits. See, the government is putting them on to steer a part of their case, a portion of their case, but they're unreliable and they cannot keep true course. And true course is required here. So be aware of some of these witnesses. They are not truth tellers. Truth needs consistency, much like a compass. When the compass needle consistently points north, you can rely on it to find your way. When the needle swings every which way, you can't trust it to find your way. These witnesses are swinging needles. You cannot trust them. Like I said, some of them have been paid substantial sums, substantial by anyone's standards, or they're receiving some kind of benefit in exchange for their testimony. These witnesses are to be looked and listened to with this in mind. You must consider their testimony with caution and great care. The government presented a 45-minute elaborate opening with slides, PowerPoint. But reflect on that PowerPoint. It did not show evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Christopher Thomas was involved in these offenses. It showed the government's theory of the case, a weak theory. And there's a saying by a fictitious detective, which is that theory is like mist on your glasses. It obscures the facts. After actually hearing the evidence, the facts, you will see that the government's evidence lacks rigor, lacks the proof beyond a reasonable doubt that is required by law. Christopher Thomas has trusted you with keeping an open mind. You swore that you would. You told the judge. So I ask you to listen. Listen to the evidence here. You will hear nothing credible, reliable linking Christopher Thomas to these charges. Don't think he must have done something because he's sitting in this courtroom. That is certainly not the standard. If you truly keep your mind open, you will see that the government has dismally failed to prove Christopher Thomas guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. As such, we will ask you at the end of this case to find him not guilty. Thank you.